They say divorce is expensive because it's worth it. But what happens when the conflict doesn't end after the papers are signed? Because now you're negotiating bedtime, birthdays, and boundaries with someone who won't cooperate. Welcome back. Welcome to Divorcing Strong, the podcast that pulls no punches when it comes to divorce. I'm Becky Sampson, better known as Bulldog Becky Brockovich, and I'm here to give you the straight talk, the strategies, and the subpoena secrets you won't hear anywhere else. With expert guests and proven advice, you'll learn your rights, your options, and gain your power that encourages a fair and equitable outcome. Divorce doesn't have to break you. It can build you. Let's get to it. Well, welcome back to another episode of the Divorcing Strong podcast. I'm Becky Sampson, your host. And I do have to say, I'm coming to this show with a little bit of a heavy heart. And let me tell you the reason why is because I received a call from a gal today who is in the absolute thick of it, of a divorce. And she just was in tears and I could hear her voice trembling. And, I just said to her, I said, first of all, I get it. And the second thing I want you to remember is that you're not alone. And this is what I hope to accomplish with this Divorcing Strong podcast is that I want you to know, whether it's you or a family member that's going through this or a dear friend, that there are resources, there are people out here that are, and I'm connecting to them every single day, that are here because they're passionate about getting you the education and the information that you need in order to navigate this and really come through it stronger. I feel like I repeat myself a lot in regards to that, but sometimes all you need is somebody to validate how you feel and to know that, hey, this is going to be one of the hardest things that you do in your life, is to navigate this division or this transition of life, going from being married, having children, and divorcing. And today we're going to really be talking a lot about how to co-parent and how to deal with that high conflict and how to really negotiate those difficult conversations and how to deal with your kids and how to make it the least traumatic possible. Because we know that this is a difficult thing. So I also want to just remind you too, we're always live Tuesday through Thursday. We've got a busy week on Thursday, a busy day on Thursday with a bunch of shows, but you can feel free to like, share, or comment on any of these. I will always respond to you. And also make sure that I'm going to put this on here. If you want to, I used to have it over on the other side, but if you want to, you can download the free download of 100 divorce terms, because that's really important that you understand the terminology of divorce in order for you to negotiate, whether you're talking with an attorney or other professionals in this field. So thank you so much for joining us today. And on today's episode of Divorcing Strong, I'm joined by Maria Natapov. I hope I said that, Natapov. She's a BH2O certified co-parenting and step-parenting coach and founder of Synergistic Stepparenting. Maria's story doesn't come from theory. It comes from the inside of family conflict. She's a child of divorce, a survivor of domestic abuse, a step-parent who learned the hard way, and an adoptive mom who chose to build a family with attention. Today, Maria is vice chair of the Sparrow Collective and trusted advisor to divorce professionals, financial advisors, and parenting coaching, who sees every day how high conflict dynamics hurt children along the way, and that long after the paperwork is signed. Through her BH2O methodology, rapid resolution sessions, and communication tools, Maria helps caregivers shift from emotional reactivity to grounded leadership, so homes become places of safety again. So this conversation is for anyone who feels exhausted by co-parenting drama, overwhelmed by blending family tension, or unsure how to lead with love without losing themselves. Maria's work reminds us that harmony isn't accidental. It's built step by step. Stay with us for a powerful, grounding conversation. Wow, I'm struggling today. Welcome to the show. Sorry, I got to add you. There we go. There we go.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much Becky, for that warm intro. I appreciate it. It's great to be here.
Oh, well, you know what? One of the things I love that you come at this, and most people do, but most people come at this with the passion because of what you've been through. And really you've been through a lot of different touches, and I really respect the fact that you've chosen to be in the space to help and support other people as well. So tell everybody kind of the backstory of what got you here, a little bit more about what makes you passionate and what you focus on now in helping people.
Yeah, thanks for asking that. So as you shared, I'm a child of an extremely contentious divorce. Additionally, we were immigrants. I immigrated with my family when I was 8 years old from a very different cultural background, which was Moscow, Russia. So night and day compared to America, cultural views, values, etiquette, norms, etc. How children are viewed, how it's acceptable as a child to interact. In this country, I find that at least at the time, I think still today, there's a lot of autonomy. Autonomy was recognized and encouraged throughout the entire kind of childhood journey into adulthood. In my former culture and country, and I think even more so for women than for men or girls as it was, there's a lot of, put your head down, obey, elders know best, you are seen and not heard. And there's a lot of expectations, and autonomy was not a priority. So I think some of that shaped my journey into a first marriage that was emotionally and physically abusive. Met when I was a teenager, and I was a particularly young teenager at that time due to being very coddled. And I think that definitely had a mark on how things transpired. And none of that, of course, was by intention. I was extremely loved, which I very much appreciate. But it's a perfect example of parents have the skills that they have and they don't know what they don't know, which I think many people frequently find themselves in that position. And so I stayed in that relationship for 16 years. And when I left, what happens in emotionally abusive situations, especially where there's control and gaslighting and sort of a web, if you will, emotionally and mentally of an experience. Basically, boundaries get encroached upon very slowly over time. And so frequently, this dynamic, again, plays out over years. And it's common to find oneself in a situation that you never expected to be in, almost where you don't recognize what you're actually living in and maybe even yourself. And that was very much my experience. I also was not able to see it for myself. It took the help of a counselor at that time. And very frankly, it took several sessions for me she would literally give me homework and say, look for signs of this and let me know next week. And then I'd come back and say, okay, you were right. These things happened. And so it took a lot for me to even understand what the situation is that I had found myself in.
And I think that's very, very common. I mean, even for the lady that I spoke with today, is that it takes some time to connect the dots when you really haven't seen it. And then you start connecting the dots. And the first thing I think is just so sad that people go to, how stupid could I be? How dumb could I be? I'm smarter than this. And how did I fall for that? And I told her, I specifically said, look, it's totally normal what you're feeling. I mean, everybody's gone through it, especially when you deal with a really toxic relationship. It's not about blaming yourself, but it's just connecting the dots and taking the next right step and getting the support that you need.
Exactly. But yeah, she was spot on. For years, I realized when I was leaving that relationship due to what I discovered in those sessions early on with that counselor, I didn't have the language to explain to loved ones and family what was going on and why we were separating. And I remember saying it was mutual. And that was it, because when I went to formulate the words, I felt so much shame and just exactly what you're saying. I felt so foolish. I felt stupid. I felt like, why would I stay? And I Yeah, I didn't even know where to begin with those conversations and how to answer those questions that were coming up for me. And I'm like, can't even imagine the questions that would be coming up for them. So I didn't even want to go down that rabbit hole. And it wasn't until years later that I met another survivor who actually had gotten involved in therapy much earlier on, before the official breakup of her relationship, that
Mhm.
I found language. And I felt so validated for the first time because of how she spoke about what she had experienced. Um,
Mhm.
that didn't happen until years later. So, for anybody listening, if you're finding yourself in that position and if you're wondering, why does it feel so bad? Trust that instinct and intuition, because it is your wisdom, it is your knowing, and ultimately it is that will bring you to a way forward and a way out, if that is your experience. And then I met my now husband, who had a daughter, and despite me, um, you know, really trying to dissuade him from dating me. I felt that I was not mom material, and I try to make a very strong case. It was like,
Mm.
you need a better a better
Well,
person.
you didn't have children with your first that was your first experience of the step.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Yes. And actually, but largely by design, essentially, I felt that I didn't want to, you know, put a poor child through having myself as a parent. Like, I didn't think that I had the skills, and I took
Yeah.
that responsibility very seriously, and I didn't want to emotionally maim any young children, right? So it was I was very much holding on to that, and I think that was largely a sign of the healing I still had to do.
Mhm.
My now husband, luckily back then, didn't listen to me, and he reminded me that it was because of whatever I had identified that I had been wanting from my caregivers that I didn't get, that
Mhm.
set me up for better than I was realizing for that responsibility and that role. And when I really let that sink in, we decided I would meet his daughter, and essentially, depending on how that meeting went, it would be the make or break. So if things went well, I passed go, and if they didn't, that would be the end of our journey. And it went really well. So I became a stepmom, and then 5 years into that role, my then stepdaughter revealed she was being abused and neglected by her bio mom and stepdad, and it was horrible, and
Oh
it
my
all
gosh.
came
But
out.
see, you know what, isn't that interesting? Because I find myself in a similar situation, but isn't that interesting that you've been prepared for that? Because your now husband recognized that you have an ability to empathize in a way that some people may not have. And so now you find yourself with a stepdaughter in that kind of situation. How did you handle that? And I can see why you're passionate now about helping children and stepchildren, you
Yeah.
know, navigate through this.
Yeah, it was really scary, right? It was like it was our own worst nightmare coming true, because we had been seeing, primarily in the academic realm, signs that something was off, but we couldn't figure it out. And I would rack my brain coming up with theories that I would be like, is it this? Is it that? And I was driving my husband crazy, absolutely crazy, because it consumed me for about a year and a half, because I could just sense something was wrong and we didn't know what it was. And therefore we couldn't help her,
Mm,
because she was being silenced as well. So she was
mm.
being physically abused, horribly emotionally abused, and being sexually groomed. And so it literally, like, the worst nightmare coming true, but at the same time, relief when she shared, because finally we had answers. And that meant we knew how to get her support, what kind of support, what were the steps that we needed to take. And we finally knew what it was we were looking at, right? And insights and awareness is the first place to start. I always say that to everybody I speak with. So it was
Has
really,
your husband ever turned to you and been like, "Where'd you come from? Like, how did, like, thank goodness I have you on my team," you know?
he actually has. Yes, he has. But I will say we do make a pretty good team. He, unfortunately, all three of us had our own versions of trauma that we were bringing, just in different kind of forms. And I
Yeah.
think for me, because possibly even because of the cultural differences, because they had that experience, I think I was just always looking for answers. And so maybe I was a little bit further along just because I had always been on the search. But I
So
think
what kind of gaps did you see in the system or with the legal process, I should say, when it came to helping protect her?
So thankfully, we were very fortunate in that we were able to protect her. But in general, I hear all the time things like, everything is all about what you can prove. It's all about what's presented. Sometimes even evidence isn't, taken as seriously because
Mhm.
there's just so many variables, right? I hear it all the time from legal professionals, especially when it comes to having to make a decision in the courtroom and relying heavily on the judge's ruling, because again, it just depends. Have they had a chance to dig into everything? Um, and a whole host of other factors. So I always hear from attorneys that I work with, it's always best to settle out of court where possible, and
Mhm.
that is always their top priority. And really, if possible, not even going that route, because then you have say, you have a voice, at least you're involved in the decision-making process. You're not just leaving it up to a third party
Absolutely.
professional who doesn't know you, they don't know your children, they don't know your case. They just don't have enough time to really sit with the information to make a truly informed decision, despite being strongly committed to wanting to make one. But unfortunately, right, like there's just limitations in the reality of the system and how everything runs. So, obviously, what I hear constantly from professionals is, if at all possible and where at all possible, start with mediation, because
Mhm.
it can give you a great background for discovery, for possibly identifying points where you can find a resolution and find agreement. And then, even if you end up needing to litigate or escalate the matter further, you at least have those pieces already established, and you will save yourself time and energy and resources. So that's just common, yeah, advice that I.
So what do you think were the some of the steps of success when it came to being a step parent, or when you're helping people with a step parent situation where they're coming in and they're, you know, because it is kind of a scary thing. I also wasn't able to have children, well, I wasn't. I don't know about your situation, but so being now married and having stepchildren, what are some of the things that you found or that you teach to other people to help navigate that as a step parent,
I
especially
think
when you're dealing with difficult exes?
yes, I think the key is connection over consequences always.
Mm,
Don't try to be a disciplinarian, you likely won't be able to. In some cases, even if you met the children when they were really young, they'll put up with it a lot of times in the beginning because they don't know any better, because that's the dynamic they're exposed to, but they might resent you for it after. So tread really, really, really lightly.
mhm.
And I think not taking things personally is really important as well. And really trying your best to create and establish and nurture and foster relationships, including, not overstepping. I can't tell you that I did all these things right, despite having step parents at a certain stage of my childhood and being a child of divorce, and knowing what I was craving. I can't tell you that I did these things right. I think I definitely did overstep, unfortunately, in some respects. But I think also being transparent,
Yeah.
not putting on a false facade. So, for example, um, and not, I don't mean oversharing by any means. It's so important to ensure that your communication with children is age appropriate
Mhm.
and that you're not speaking to things that really are not yours to speak about. So, like anything about either of their parents, what they're doing, what they might be doing that you don't agree with, that's just not a conversation to happen. You can speak about it neutrally, maybe like,
Mhm.
I believe that this is how we should be treated, but not in a direct way that may seem derogatory. But I also want to make sure that it really is coming from a genuine place in your heart, that you resolve that conflict within yourself. That's actually the heart of a lot of the work that I do with co-parents and step parents, because children feel that. And this isn't just about policing our speech or behavior. I know there's a lot of programs and now apps that do that, and I think that really falls short. Ultimately, what they're feeling, what they're impacted by, for better or worse, is conflict. So the more conflict, the worse off they typically are. The less able they are to adjust, because they're just carrying that weight, and it takes up a huge emotional toll on them and frequently interferes with their energy that they're needing for healthy development that is appropriate. And conversely, the less conflict, the more they acquire skills to navigate challenging moments, challenging transitions, be they family dynamics, divorce, separation, you name it. But if they are having healthy modeling and a secure and emotionally secure environment
Yeah.
that gives them the freedom to love both parents, they can adjust, they can adapt. And that's really what it comes down to, is skills and releasing the war in our heart.
I just thought of the fact is that these kids are put through a lot of conflict, and it's interesting that when they go back and forth, they're put in the middle. I know we talk about this a lot. They're put in the middle. Like, I love that some of the things that you had just mentioned that are helping them on the mental side and help them not deal with the conflict, because they're too young to really understand the full. I mean, we as adults think that, oh yeah, I mean, they have the knowledge that we have and that sort of thing, but they really don't. I mean, their minds are really coming, and a lot of these kids also, do you also find that a lot of kids end up being pleasers?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They respond in such a variety of ways. Sometimes they have behaviors coming out sideways. They're really aggressive. They might be, it really depends. They could be argumentative. They could be aggressive. They could be kind of causing trouble, perhaps bullying, or, not keeping up with their academics. It could be the opposite, where they try to be the perfect kid
Yeah.
and they're trying to be extra helpful and, people pleasing, etc., getting the best grades. But again, all of it is putting unnecessary and unsustainable pressure right on them. And so oftentimes what I recommend to see if there's, or to notice, for parents to notice if something is going on and if emotionally maybe the child is dealing with a really heavy toll, look for anything that feels different. So any behaviors that are suddenly new and it seems out of character, that is a good sign that perhaps paying more attention is important. But really, I think it's so critical for parents to hold the space and really
Mhm.
create an environment where it's okay to talk about things, including the hard things, the things that might be
Yeah.
hard to hear, whatever that might be. And it's not enough to just say, I'm here for you whenever you like, let me know if you want to talk. That's just not enough. It's not going to do the trick. It's not going to open the door. It requires a certain level of vulnerability. And again, not oversharing, not speaking poorly, but perhaps something like, I remember when I was your age and a friend of mine had parents that were getting divorced and it was really hard, or maybe you yourself were in
Mhm.
that position, and having meaningful conversations. Worst case scenario, I always like to suggest to parents, watch a clip. If there's a clip in a movie or a film, or a show or something like that that deals with it, maybe that's a great starting point.
I love that. I actually love that idea, because we've done that as well, is when we're watching a movie and there's a theme that's going on in the movie, then you use that as a teaching moment,
Exactly.
because they do relate to those kind of things, and have questions. I mean, they're connecting the dots just like, like we as adults are. We're always looking, but even as kids, they're really trying to connect the dots. Like, who can I trust? Who can I not trust? What is true, what's not true, what's life all about. I don't know if you know this statistic, but it keeps coming to my mind, that I think it was like 85% of kids or entrepreneurs that are successful entrepreneurs ended up having a really challenging upbringing. And I
Mm,
was like, wow, that makes perfect sense, because they become problem solvers, right? They've got grit. They've, I'm not saying at all, I'm not condoning abuse or anything like that, but it makes perfect sense, because it takes a lot to be an entrepreneur and to
yes.
do business. And they usually will turn to that because they've already built those skills early on in their life. I was going to ask you too, is you obviously do the BH2O methodology. Can you break down like how this framework helps parents
Yes.
handle co-parenting with a narcissist, or even like a high conflict ex?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that question. It's one of my
Yeah.
favorite ones because I know that so many have that on their mind. And I hear that frequently, like, oh, this works. This is the common response when I talk about BH2O. This is wonderful for those who get along. But That's not going to work here.
Right.
And, I'm going to debunk that because this program was expressly created for the high conflict, including if parents. So we don't get into labels. We don't get into diagnoses. That's just not our
Right.
role. That's not part of the scope. But if and when one of the parents is a narcissist or is exhibiting those kinds of traits and characteristics, this is what this program was created for. And so this program is powerful because we ground in what are our shared values that we want to instill in our kids. What is our why? How do we know what is like our ultimate goal for our co-parenting? How do we know we've achieved it, right? Like, how do we know we've done our job essentially? Because when we start out with that clarity of intention, we are much more likely to get there. Think of your GPS.
Mhm.
If you have no end destination, it's not going to be able to direct you effectively. So it's the same thing here. So we start off with that. And then the other key that I notice, especially since you mentioned narcissistic type of dynamics, I'm going to speak to that, or those who are in coercive control situations or emotionally or physically, maybe there's been abuse. So this program is not for if abuse is actively going on. I will say that.
Mm.
But if those dynamics have existed and now you need to co-parent, what I love about this as a survivor is that it truly comes down to self-leadership and self-empowerment. So we spend a lot of time identifying and delineating the nuanced layers to those dynamics. Because a lot of times what I see and realize now looking back at my own journey from step parenting through parenting is that unintentionally we are undermining our values sometimes or our why. And we don't realize
Mm.
it because we're doing it for our kids. We're so blinded by our love and our care and our support. We don't realize unintentionally we're going exactly against what we're hoping to create for them or to nurture in them. And
Mhm.
that is so powerful, as well as how we're unintentionally feeding right into the power struggle or feeding the conflict from our end. And conflict, like fire, if it doesn't have oxygen, it does not survive. So it doesn't actually require both parents' buy-in. And we have no magic wand. We talk about that all the time. We're not going to change our co-parent. This is not going to be a magical experience where, you put them through a machine and then they come out on the other side of the conveyor belt completely changed. No, they're going to keep being them. We have, right, they
Yeah.
have free will. So we're not going to assume that they're going to change. What the opportunity is that when you shift how you're interacting,
Yep.
even in small, tiny ways, which is all that we're really doing. We're taking one baby action. We're doing it consistently. We're tweaking it. We're iterating. We're ensuring it's the right action and it's doable and that it truly speaks to the need, your child's need or children's need, because that's really what the point is. That is what shifts the dynamic.
So you actually said something that was really important. I think that it's important for people to listen, is that oftentimes we feel powerless when we're dealing with a difficult personality on the other side. And I appreciate that you don't put the labels, because I mean there's all spectrums of it, right?
Exactly. I love that
And
you're saying this. This is exactly what I say to people.
yes.
Yes.
Because I remember before, I mean, I've been in life coaching for so many years and people are like, I divorced a narcissist. And I was like, okay, okay. And until I actually experienced a relationship with that kind of behavior, I didn't really fully understand and appreciate the
Mhm.
struggle that it is. However, I always let people know, like, look, the more you study that kind of behavior and that kind of toxicity, you realize it has less to do with you and more to do with, so it's easier to take your personal, like, not be personally offended by the way that they're reacting or how they're doing it.
Yes.
But something that you said was really important is often people feel powerless when they're in a relationship, but you're saying that you actually have the power if you remain calm, collective, and make choices. And again, that comes from me at least, years of study to understand what I was dealing with. So then I was like, okay, that's just who he is. It's not going to change. And this is how I'm choosing to show up so
Yeah.
that it's healthy for me. So that's, you can create harmony, and talk a little bit about that. You can create harmony without the consent of the other person.
Absolutely. It comes down to a relational operating system. That's what we're creating. That's literally what the whole program is. And unlike some of the other types of support out there, like, for example, parenting coordination, sometimes it's prescriptive, or other co-parenting curriculums
Mhm.
might be prescriptive, right? Like they're essentially focusing on policing behaviors, policing the language that you use. And look, mindfulness and intentionality is very important. And we definitely have a tool that we walk through and regularly rely on in BH2O as well, called clear communication, that
Mhm.
does focus on how are we communicating. But it's not about policing our speech. The question is, are we being concise? Are we being
Mhm.
clear? Is it listener ready, right? Because one piece of communication is we have a message to relay. The other is the person needs to be able to receive our message. If we're being aggressive or accusatory, et cetera, with our language, their hearts are going to close, their ears are going to close. We're not going to get anywhere because our communication isn't landing. So
Is
we're
there a question that you would recommend somebody actually ask themselves before they send out a communication?
Such a great question. I think the one that comes to mind the most in co-parenting, and it's really, really, really powerful because it really cuts through the noise, is how is this benefiting our child? Why?
Mm.
What is the benefit, and or potentially what is the concern around their well-being, right? Like, how is it potentially negatively impacting their well-being? That would be the question for me.
Which is really keeping your kids' needs and desires and their concern and well-being up in the forefront of
Yeah,
your. I think so many people in high conflict are like, I want to be right and they need to be wrong, and
right.
it's just you got to step back and
And
realize,
I have one more that I
yeah,
think is an important additional one that I think has to be thrown into the mix, is because sometimes what I find is, and I've totally been guilty of it, our certainty can often undermine all the beauty that we're hoping to create. So
tell me
instead
more about that.
instead of leading with certainty, how do we lean into curiosity and say to ourselves, okay, what else could be true?
Mm.
Okay, I'm so certain this is exactly what these pieces are. Here's what they mean. Here's how the dots are connected. What else could be true that I
Yeah.
don't know about yet?
Yeah, and then that actually opens up them to other possibilities of what might be true. And I think, and
Yeah.
sometimes we react from that trauma, right? That we have,
Yes.
that no, this is exactly what he's trying to do. And I'm like,
No, I love that you're saying this, and I
yeah,
want to highlight it because
yeah,
it's so important, especially in these kinds of dynamics. It's common, right? As I said, they develop over years. So we're used to being in a certain kind of mental space, right? Like there's a certain way we're almost conditioned to interact and respond and think. And so we want to be intentional about not letting the past dictate the future. This isn't to say we're going to pretend it didn't happen. This isn't to say we're not going to validate it, because that's important. It's there and it's real. So we have to consider it. But the key is to respond from what is currently, presently happening, so that
mm,
we're not prescribing, right? And living from that place of fear or disempowerment or whatever was. And also so that we're not just prescribing our own experience and then putting it onto the kids. Because again, our relationship and the dynamic between us as co-parents is different than the dynamic between the child and each of the co-parents. And so it's important to just really look at it with that lens of curiosity, awareness, and intentionality, um, instead of jumping too quickly to assumptions. I think that's really where people shoot themselves in the foot, myself included in the past, is
yep,
when we jump too quickly to assumptions or assuming like we already know, right? Because, and it's really remarkable. And I've sat with this more recently because I had to transition. My daughter's 20, and she, my role looks very different than when I was protective mama bear, having to ensure her well-being.
mhm,
She was really going through it when we first learned of everything. And it took me a while to shut that part down. That part was really strong. I was used to being the soldier. I'm on the front lines. I have my shield. I have my armor. I have all my things. That's not what she's needing anymore. And
yeah,
so it took a lot, like 9 months. I had to put myself through the eye of the needle to recognize like what I could let go of and really transform, really transmute that energy into like what will really serve her now. And that doesn't serve her. Me giving her the room to make her decisions, including maybe stumbling, maybe falling, maybe skinning her knee, maybe breaking an arm. That's what she's needing from me. And it's not easy to do, right? Like, I'm sharing this candidly because I think it's a perfect example of how, as parents, we're so loving. Our kids are our everything, and we want to wrap them up in bubble wrap, but that's not what they need.
No, and it doesn't build the muscle, right? If they don't get stretched and if they don't get hurt in that regards. I
Yeah.
mean, I grew up at a summer camp for kids, so my dad was always like, "Look, I'm not doing for you what you can do for yourself." And I'm like, "No, but I want you to do my, saddle and whatever."
Yeah.
And that didn't teach me. He knew that if he coddled us, that we wouldn't learn and grow what we need to. And you bring up a really good point, because I have a really good friend of mine that just shared with me recently. She's like, look, she went to her kids and said, look, I be patient with me, because I've only known and practiced for years how to be a parent of children. I don't know how to be a parent of adults. And
Yes.
so, like, help teach me how I can support you, because my role is different now. And I think that is a really great point, is to say to your kids, look, I this is new waters. These are new experiences for me. Help me understand. So I can,
100%. And clarifying, like, okay, like, here's what I'm understanding you would like our relationship to be. Is that what you would like? Like, there's a
Mhm.
lot more conversations about permission and setting a mutual intention, because maybe they're overlooking something, but maybe I'm overlooking something. Maybe I'm just expecting through my own lens, right? And it's a perfect, I think, example of, no matter what, we need to come together with people to ensure that we're moving in the direction we want to be heading. And what does that look like?
Yeah.
What are the turns we need to make, and the ones that we need to avoid to get there? So ultimately, these skills, they don't just live with our co-parent. They don't just live in this one small aspect of life. They translate everywhere, right? Like, I mean, it's funny, we see similar dynamics sometimes, even in professional settings and among professionals, that we do with our co-parents, because at the end of the day, we're all human,
Yeah.
and they're just human layers. These are human responses. These are human emotions. These are human needs.
Yeah.
And, whether it's misunderstanding or whether it's attunement, regardless, like, and many of us, I will say, did not grow up with this. We just didn't have the skills. We didn't know what we now know, and it wasn't as readily available. And so there's nothing wrong with it, right? Like, this is not a personal failure. The good news is you can learn this, and you can build these operational systems for how to interact effectively, um, and intentionally, regardless of who it is that you're navigating challenges and conflict with, because conflict is not going to go away. But how
No.
we handle it and how much chaos we experience while we're navigating it is a choice, and that we can do something about.
I 100% agree with that, because having studied conflict resolution and mediation, peace building in
Mhm.
college, while I was going through my second divorce, I learned that really one person can shift everything.
Exactly.
And the other thought that just came to me is, I've always felt really strongly, and now that I'm married and have 4 stepchildren,
Mhm.
of course they're grown, they're adults, but I remember this over the Christmas. I wrote most of them letters and just said, "Look, I just want you to know how much I appreciate you being in my life and allowing me to be in your life. And it's really up to you at what level you want to engage, because I really believe in freedom and the ability to choose.
Yeah.
And I'm here, and my love and acceptance is here. However, it's yours to choose. And I think that that's an important part, especially when you're dealing with more stepping into adult stepchildren, where they're on their own journey, and they're, how can we support you?
Yeah.
And it's been an interesting journey for me as well, to be transparent, um, to love them where they're at, because everybody's on their own journey.
Yes. That's so beautiful. And I just want to mention something about that really briefly, because I think that there's a lot of nuance to what you said. So it's interesting. Yes, absolutely giving choice, especially when you're the incoming step parent, because again, and especially in that kind of a situation, because like you said, they're already grown. But I will say, I talk to so many parents, and they feel really conflicted about just this concept of choice. And
Mm,
for kids, right? Like, ultimately, they're always looking at their caregivers as their caregivers. And that is a very different relationship than they'll likely have with any other adult in their lives, no matter if it's a mentor, if it's a teacher, whoever it might be, right? And so, to some degree, removing some of that the weight of having to make that choice, right? Because that can feel really heavy and that can frequently put kids in the middle. And I'm not
Yeah.
suggesting that's what's going on with your adult stepkids, but just to be mindful that even there, right? Like, I don't know, maybe, and I'm sure you already do this, Becky, because we've spoken several times. But even there, maybe like creating more of a space, right? And if obviously it's not desired or wanted or not picked up upon, that's a different thing because maybe that's communication in of itself, but creating those opportunities, right? Like I had said before, keeping the door open and just simply saying I'm here it's not the way. It doesn't feel very welcoming. It really is about how to create that welcoming environment, if you will, or
Yeah.
almost a culture of it's welcomed. And like, I'm always going to put out the olive branch. Now, whether or not you take me up on it this time is a different story, right? But I do think because I hear parents struggle so much with, I'm trying to give them choice. I'm trying not to force anything on them, but in
Yeah.
and of itself, that can feel very, very weighty. And I know we talk about this phrase of put the child at the center and not in the middle. And frequently that can feel like the middle,
Mhm.
everything else they're already navigating. So it is a very nuanced, delicate
It
line
is
to
very
draw.
delicate, very
Yeah.
delicate. And I think it's a delicate dance because,
Yes.
but I think of it oftentimes a lot like business as well, and just nature. Like this is just the natural part of us in humanity is to find what's important to that person, and
Yes.
then be able to provide that space and say, hey, I can see that this is important to you. We're here to support you in that, and validation. I mean, it's so hard because the kids end up literally trying to figure out. I mean, their whole world was just blown up
Yeah.
and they're dealing with trauma and being patient with them even through their imperfections. I mean,
Absolutely.
it is tough all along, and I appreciate the work that you're doing because I know you have a lot more to share too. Just and I love that you have, because of your experience, you really have dove in and said, look, let me create a better way. Let me show some perspective as long as people are open to seeing it different ways. And I really, really appreciate that. Maria, you're a gem. I know we've talked several times and I was like, you've got to come on the show.
Thank
So
you so much. Thank you for
yeah,
having me. And I really appreciate this conversation because I think, to your point, if we're going to leave a better world for kids, then
yeah,
we have to start stepping into leadership. And I love what you said too. It's not about perfection. They're not
no,
expecting that from us. Actually, I think it's even a stronger opportunity when we're like, you know what, we've been doing it this way, and now we know we could be doing it a different way.
yeah,
We
that vulnerability, like, hey, I've never stepped into this before. So help me understand,
Yeah,
I
and
love
and
that. Help
hey,
me
I'm growing.
understand.
Yeah, and hey, I'm growing, right? It's not too
Yeah.
late for me to learn new skills and adopt a new way of doing this. This is what I'm committing to now. What come with me, right? Let's do this together. I think that's so powerful for kids, and it makes it okay to not have to be perfect, to not have to have all the answers, and to be able to discover and grow and make mistakes along the way.
Yeah, and I love your energy that you bring because it's a very calming, grounded as we're going through this. So my last question to you is what is divorcing strong mean to you?
Mm. I think it's that. I think it's resilience. I think it's and intentionality. For me, those are the things that I would say are the most important pillars because I think when we're that way, then we will make sure that we're getting information, we're not rushing to make a decision, and that we're really considering what are the implications of our choices and our actions. And I think that just really what I've come to learn from my personal experience, as well as with clients I work with, that almost always tends to lead to better outcomes than otherwise.
Oh, thank you so much. I so appreciate it. And listen, obviously, if you're listening and you feel drawn to Maria, contact her. All of her information's down at the bottom. There's her website. You do offer consultations.
I do, absolutely.
Okay,
Yes.
perfect. So
Email me at maria@synergisticstepparenting.com.
sweet, sweet. Thank you so much for your time today. And I know you've got a busy schedule too. So we'll, hopefully they can reach out and make you busier and get some help that they need. So thanks. Hold on just one second. All right. Thanks, you guys, for joining another episode of Divorcing Strong. I don't know about you, but I just got a lot of great information. And one of the things I love is that I get to grow through this as well. I get to learn from the people that I bring on here, even in my own life, and how I can be better. And it really does come down to what Maria said is that are you open to learning and to growing and to doing the research, getting the people around you, and to open up multiple opportunities to become better at what you're doing, and especially when it comes to kids. So thank you again for joining us, and we'll be back on the show, I think, tomorrow. Talk to you soon. We'll see you on the next show. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to the Divorcing Strong podcast. This episode is sponsored by Only Subpoenas, where we make subpoenas simple, powerful, and 100% compliant. If you're having a hard time getting the information you need to settle for a fair and equitable divorce, let us help you. Whether you're an attorney or you're navigating divorce on your own, subpoenas can uncover the truth, secure the evidence you need, and level the playing field. To see how we can help, book an appointment by visiting our website at onlysubpoenas.com.